Thank you for all of the submissions for the very first round of Power BI practice, in which you get a challenge at the beginning of the week, and then at the end of the week I will walk you through my solution. Now in this first round it was about running totals and how to add a label to the very last data point in a line chart. Now let's get started. In this challenge you have to recreate this visualization over here where we have the running total for the new releases on Netflix. Okay, and you see that we only have a label for the last data point. Now we have received a lot of submissions and everybody got there. However, there were slight differences of how you got there. So let me show you how I would do it and what you should watch out for. Now this exercise is all about DAX, and when I create my measures I usually start off with a simple table just to see if everything works as I expect it to work, because it's easier to see in a table. Okay, and once I know it works, then I add it to a different visualization that I actually want to create. Now let's see how that is done. So let's add a simple table then to our report, and let's make this table a little bit bigger, and then I go over here to my Netflix titles table. And let's make the side a bit bigger, and I'm gonna add over here a new measure. Now let's start simple. If we want to calculate the running total, we first need to know how many releases there were for every month. Okay, so I'm gonna have over here a new measure, and I'm gonna call this one number of new releases. And here I can do this with count rows on the Netflix titles table. Okay, now let's add this measure then to our table, and you see we have 4,227 new releases in our dataset. Okay, now let's break it down over time. So I'm going to go to my dim date table, and let's grab our date hierarchy and also put it on there, and let's get rid of the day and the month. So here we have the breakdown of new releases over time, from the beginning, Q1 2015, all the way up to 2020, Q1, where we only have the month still January, so that's why the number here is a little bit lower. Now to count the number of new releases, I used a count rows function. However, I could also have done exactly the same, let's say with a count function. Then just pay attention that you take one of the columns, like show ID, and then close the brackets, and that would give me exactly the same result. You see, the values didn't change. All right, so now that we have the number of new releases over time, let's now calculate the running total. So the running total is just the cumulative sum. So let's create this running total measure. I'm gonna go to my Netflix titles table, select new measure, and this measure I'm gonna call number of new releases running total, RT. Right? Now to calculate the running total, we have to understand what filter context means. All right, so let's say over here 2019 Q1, where we have a number of new releases of 401. Now what is the filter context here? Well, we have a filter for the year 2019 and then quarter Q1. And what we want to do is change the filter context so that it doesn't return us the 401 only, but that it also takes into account all of the dates that were before this time period. Okay, and if we want to change the filter context or add to the filter context, we need the function calculate. All right, so I'm going to use that function calculate. Now what is our expression? Our expression, well, that is the number of new releases. I can just refer back to the measure that I just wrote. Now, in the second argument of the calculate function, we can change the filter. Okay, so what we want here is all of the dates that are equal to or before the last date of the filter context. Okay, so as an example, 2019 Q1, we want to know what the last date is. So that's the 31st of March 2019 there. And I want to take all of the dates that are equal to or before that date. Okay, now let me write this down. So we have dim date needs to be equal to or lower than the maximum date. Okay, Now, if I leave it like this and I try to add this as a measure, you will see it gives me an error. A function max has been used in a true-false expression that is used as a table filter expression. This is not allowed. Okay, so I cannot have an expression like this inside of a calculate function. And what you need to do then is to use a filter function. Okay, so let me write filter. We want to filter our date table. And over here, the filter expression stays the same. I'm gonna put this bracket also in a new row. And you see, now it lets me add that function. And let's then also add it to the table. Now we have added the number of new releases running total also to the table. And you see, it gives me exactly the same values as what I had for number of new releases. How is that possible? Well, the reason is we forgot about something very important. And that is the all function, okay? Now let me explain. Now here, for 2019 Q1, we have basically all of the dates starting on the 1st of January until the 31st of March. And if I just say in my filter expression, if I just say take everything that's equal to or before the last date that I have, which is then the 31st of March, well, in our filter context, that is everything up to the 1st of January. Okay, so I have to remove that filter context, and that is what the all function allows you to do. Okay, so I can go here and wrap this date inside of an all function and then press enter. And you see, problem is solved. Now we have our running total. Now even better is when you go back to your function and do not wrap the whole date in there, but just the date column, because that is all that we need. And you see, my running total still works. Now let me show you exactly what this all function does. So I'm going to switch here to the modeling view, and I'm going to go to the home tab, click on new table, and I'm going to call this table all example. I'm going to write all, and then over here I'm going to refer to the date table. And you see, it gives me all of the unique rows in my date table. Now, what you can do as well is just refer to one column. For example, the date column. And now you see we have all of the unique values in the date column, okay? And when you use that all function inside of a visualization, then it removes the filter context on the field that you specify there, okay? And in our case, that is the date field, okay? So when we have 2019 Q1, removes the filter context so that we can then reset that filter that we want to have, which is to take all of the dates which are equal to or lower than the last date in the filter context. So how can we write this now a little bit nicer? Well, first of all, I want to use variables, okay? So I can say something like var, and then we're gonna have here period filter equals, and then I'm gonna take what I have over here as my filter. I'm gonna use it for my variable, store it in there. Okay, so that is my period filter, which I now stored in a variable. Then I'm gonna have a second variable, and this one I'm gonna call result equals, and the result is gonna equal what I have down here, right? So let me put that up one level, and then indent this. So we're gonna calculate the number of new releases, and then we use that period filter there. Okay, so once you have your variables, you also need to have a return statement, and here we can simply then return the result. All right. Now, if you have variables, it just makes it a bit easier to read and also easier to debug your text formulas, okay? But at the end result is exactly the same. Okay, so now that we have this, let me show this on a graph, okay? So I'm gonna add a new page, and we're gonna have a line chart. Let me make this one a little bit bigger. And on this line chart, we're gonna show the number of new releases running total. I'm gonna show it over time. So I'm gonna add my date hierarchy, and I'm gonna get rid of the day and the month. And now I'm gonna expand down one level. Okay, and make sure that you sort it in ascending order. So click here in the header on the ellipse, sort in ascending order, and then also double check that we are sorting by the year and the quarter. And there you go. So now we have it in chronological order. Let's clean up the x-axis a little bit and go to here to format, x-axis, and then you want to turn off concatenate labels and also turn off the title. Okay, it looks a little bit cleaner. All right, so that seems to be working. Okay, so let's now also add some labels to it. Okay, and I want these labels to be a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna put up the stack size. So now that we have this, let's also add a slicer filter to it. Okay, so I'm gonna add a slicer, and on the slicer I'm gonna put our date hierarchy. So now that we have a slicer, let's see if it works. So I'm gonna select over here 2015, hold the control key, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, and you see, it seems to be working. Okay, now what happens if I deselect, let's say 2020? Well, you see, it still gives me the correct running total in the end. And what if I deselect 2015 and 2016? Ooh, here this seems to be, well, this seems to be the running total starting from 2015. So here it depends a little bit on what you want. And do you want to start the running total at the beginning of your dataset, 2015, or do you want to start now in Q1 2017? Because if I just add the number of new releases to it, you see that for Q1 2017 we had 194. Okay, so let's say you want to restart, so respect the filter that comes from the slicer. Okay, then we have to make a small adjustment to our formula. So let me go back, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace all with all selected. Okay, and then press enter and nothing happens. Why is that? Well, because in our measure we have all selected dim date column. What we have on our slicer is not the date but the date hierarchy. Okay, so we have to go back to our measure and just get rid of that column and have here all selected dim date, so that it looks at all of the columns in the date table. Okay, so that it removes all of the columns in our date table and still respects the filter that comes from our slicer. Okay, let's see if that works. Let's press enter, and you see we now start in Q1 2017 at 194. And if I also remove 2017 from a slicer, and you see now it restarts in 2018 Q1. Okay, so that is the big difference between all and all selected. All right, so it depends a bit on what you're looking for. Another alternative way of writing the running total is as follows. I'm gonna have over here another measure, and let's call this one number of new releases, running total 2. Okay, what you can also say is that we're going to have one variable where we look for the max date in the filter context. So let's call this one date max equals max and then the date column. Okay, and then we're going to have var result equals, and then here we can write our calculate function. So we are going to calculate the number of new releases, and we want the date to be lower than or equal to date max. Okay, now close your calculate function and then also use the return statement, because we're using variables and we want to return the result. Okay, so now let me also add this one to our visualization. Now you see that in this measure I'm not respecting the filter that comes from the filter context. However, if I remove now the filters, it should be exactly the same. You see, one overlaps the other, and as soon as I start changing the filter, you see now there's a slight difference because I have 2015 not selected, and the last one, the second alternative, there I have not an all selected. Okay, although not strictly necessary, I would generally also recommend that you go back over here and type in all dim date function, so that is all of the filters are removed from the date column. Okay, now the all dim date is not strictly necessary here because the relationship is between the date and the Netflix dataset on the date columns, which are also stored as dates. So here it's just not necessary, but best practice. All right. So now that we have a measure for the running total, it's time to look at the second part of our challenge, which is how to get one label for the last data point in our line chart. Let's have a look. In order to achieve this, we need a measure that checks if the date is the very last date in a visualization and only then returns the running total. All right. Also here, I would first create a measure and check it inside of a normal table visualization. So let's go back to a table and I'm going to add a new measure. And here we can use a function that's called last date, which returns the last non-blank date of a column. Okay. And then it needs a bunch of dates. And we want to use here the all function again, so that we remove any filter context from our visualization. All right, and then we can say here dim date, okay, two closing brackets. Then let's add it as well to our table and let's see what it returns. And you see it returns everywhere the 17th of January 2020. Let me update the formatting as well. So I hope that this formula makes sense why we need this all function, huh? Because if I don't have this all function and I would leave it like this, it always gives me the last date of the current filter context. Okay, so that's why we need this all function in there. Okay, so now that we know how to figure out the last date in our data set, we can continue with the next measure, and this one we can call number of new releases on last date. Okay, let's put it on a new line. Now let's work with variables again. Makes it much easier to write your formulas. So we have over here var and then date, last one, and well, we just figured that one out, so we can just refer back to that measure. Okay. Then over here, another variable where we want to have the date max, which gives us the last date in the filter context. Okay, so I'm just going to use my max function here and then apply it to the date column in my date table. And then a last variable where we're going to have our result. And here we want to check if the date max is equal to date last, and if it is, then I want to return our running total, so the number of new releases running total, and then close your brackets. Because we are using variables, let's then also use a return statement, and we're going to return the result. Let's also add this one to a table. And you see, we have only the value 4,227 for the last date in our dataset. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to our previous visualization, the line chart, and I'm gonna add that new measure to our visualization. Okay, so let's select it and let's click here on number of new releases on last date. And now we have a marker in there. Okay. Now, also when you hover over it in the tooltip, you see we have both measures in there. Now, once you have this, you can go to Format, and then let's go to Data Labels. Scroll down a little bit, and then here you can turn Customize Series on. And here we can choose between the two different series that we put on our visualizations. So let's start with the first one and turn the data labels off, and then only keep it for the second one. And that's it. We have now our label only for the last data point in our visualization. Now we are almost there. Let's see again how it interacts with the slicer that we have here. All right. So I'm gonna first get rid of all of the filters. And then let's select only 2020, 2019, 2018. And you see there's no problem here. We always still have this last data point, okay? Let's now start from the earlier years, okay? Let's remove again our filters and then go to 2015, 16, 17. You see now, this second series that only shows a label for the last data point isn't there, okay? So we have to make a change. Now let's go back to our last date measure. And I'm gonna write a little bit differently, okay? So let's remove what we have and start in a new line. And here we want to use the calculate function again, okay? Now what is our expression? Well, we want to have the last date, okay? So the last date of our dim date table, okay? Comma, and now we can adjust the filter context. So here we're going to use a function called ALLSELECTED and then refer to the dim date table. And it's important that you do not choose the date column, but over here the whole table, okay? Otherwise it doesn't work if you have the hierarchy on your slicer. Okay, so what does this function do? Well, we return the last date, okay? And then we adjust here the filter context, okay? So all removes all of the filters from the dates that we have on our axis, okay? However, it respects the filter that comes from the slicer, all right? And that should then fix our issue. And let's see if that works. And you see, we have our label back again. Now, of course, here we have last date as a measure. I could actually also have written it inside of the other measure. So if you just copy it over and then go back to a number of new releases on last date. So instead of referring here to that measure, you could also have saved it inside of that measure that we have already here, inside of this variable. Gives us the same result, and now we don't need this last date measure anymore. Okay, so let me double check our result. I removed all of the filters from my slicer and added back all of the labels. And let's say we just select 2017. You see they start at the same point, okay? And over here we have this extra label in the end. Then if I select 2018, 19, yes, seems to be working no matter what I select on our slicer. So, okay, so this is it for the very first challenge of the Power BI practice round 1. I hope you had fun solving it and learned a lot from it. Now, if you like this content, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel. And I hope that you participate as well in the next one.